When I walked into my parents' house that day, my mother's calm voice froze me in place. My sister's kids eat first. Selena's boys can wait for the crumbs. My children sat in the corner with empty plates on their knees. My sibling laughed. My father didn't even look up. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply took my sons and walked out. What they didn't know was that the moment they pushed my children into that corner, they pushed themselves into a place far worse. This is the story of how I stopped feeding a family that starved my children. When I stepped into my parents' home, I stopped cold. My mother's voice floated out from the dining area, steady, almost satisfied. My sister's children eat first, and Selena's sons can wait for whatever is left. My sibling chuckled. My father never even raised his eyes. In the corner, my children sat with empty plates resting on their knees, pretending they did not feel hunger. My chest constricted, yet inside me everything grew quiet. I offered no argument. I offered no explanation. I simply gathered my boys and left. What none of them realized, what none of them sensed, was that the instant they forced my children into that corner, they forced themselves into a far darker place. Yes, I am Selena. And if I speak honestly, the moment in my parents' dining room did not appear without warning. It was only the first time their ranking became so clear, so loud, that even my silence could no longer shield me from it. The truth is, the pattern started years before my boys, Jalen and Theo, were ever born. When I was 17, still holding my first part-time job, my mother, Ellen, a woman who always seemed one breath away from disaster, asked whether I could contribute a little toward groceries. My father, Harold, practical to the edge of coldness, nodded and said it would teach responsibility. $20 here, $50 there, and before I grasped what was occurring, giving turned into a reflex, a habit then a duty. By the time I reached college, they were sending me photos of bills, notes about repairs, and whenever I called to check if everything was all right. My mother's voice always trembled in exactly the right spots. I failed to see it then, but looking back, it was performance, rehearsed worry, perfectly timed. When I finished school and secured my first full-time position, the requests shifted tone. They were no longer, "Could you help?" They became, "We really need you." Dental work for my father, a broken appliance, a car problem. It always arrived as an emergency, urgent, unavoidable, and somehow always timed with the weeks my paycheck landed. And then came Vanessa, my older sibling. She was the one my parents praised. The one whose children, Lily and Caleb, were always welcomed, always admired, always presented as the ordinary ones. When her car failed, I assisted with the repairs. When she needed help with insurance, I covered that as well. I told myself it was temporary. Family supports family, right? But when I married Darius, my husband, a patient, steady man who noticed more than I ever did, the imbalance grew sharper. He would ask, "Do they ever offer to help us?" I would brush it off. They are busy. Yet every time a holiday arrived, every time there was something to mark, I noticed the seating, the invitations, the small moments of distance. Darius would quietly withdraw during family talks, as though he already understood he was never written into the script. And then the children came. When Jalen was born, my mother held him as if he were fragile glass. Not cherished, delicate, uncertain, as if she did not quite know where he belonged. When Theo arrived 2 years later, my father offered congratulations, yet his eyes flickered with the same hesitation. I told myself I was imagining it. I blamed fatigue, stress, anything except bias. But children sense what adults overlook. Jalen learned early that his cousins received the first turn, the better toys, the larger portions. Theo noticed the seating patterns, how Lily and Caleb always sat near the adults, while he and Jalen were sent to play in another room. And every time something tightened in my chest, I convinced myself I was being too sensitive. The requests for money never ceased. They only increased. Mortgage assistance, medical bills, a sudden roof repair, a mysterious, unexpected cost that always appeared right before holidays. And every time I agreed, believing that generosity would eventually close the emotional gap. But it never did. The moment I walked into that dining room, the moment I saw my boys in the corner with empty plates, it was not merely a shock. It was recognition. Nothing had changed. I had been funding a ranking that pushed my children to the margins. I had been financing a family who viewed my boys as leftovers, not kin. And standing in that doorway, watching Lily and Caleb take second helpings while my children stared at nothing, I finally understood. This was no accident. This was the system. One I had helped construct without ever seeing it clearly. And once that understanding settled into my bones, something else rose with it, something still sharp and final. I was not going to allow them to overlook my sons ever again. By the time I returned to my parents' house that evening, I believed the worst had already occurred, that the humiliation of watching my boys sit in a corner with empty plates was the breaking point. I did not realize the true trigger was still waiting for me, resting quietly beneath the surface like a fault line ready to open. When I opened the front door, the house was too still. The kind of stillness that is not peaceful, only empty. I stepped into the hallway, and that is when I heard it again. My mother, Ellen, the woman who raised me on phrases like family first, was speaking in the same tone she used when justifying anything she preferred not to question. My sister's children eat first, she said, and Selena's sons can wait for the crumbs. It is only practical. My sibling Vanessa, the one who had always assumed her children belonged at the center of every family gathering, gave a small laugh. It is better they grow accustomed to it now, she added. They were born to live on what remains. And then my father, Harold, logical, never emotional, closed the circle. They need to learn their place. That is simply how things are. I moved before they even noticed I was standing just beyond the doorway. In the dining room's warm light, I could see everything clearly. Lily and Caleb finishing their second servings of pasta, sitting comfortably at the table, while Jalen and Theo, my boys, hovered near the doorway, as if waiting for permission to exist. Jalen met my eyes for half a second, and in that look I felt something break. He was no longer confused. He understood. He understood exactly where the adults in this house had placed him. That was the moment, not the crumbs, not the empty plates, not the laughter. It was the expression on my child's face, the quiet shrinking, the practiced acceptance of less, that rewired something inside me. I knew then that nothing I said inside that house would matter. Words would not repair this. Confrontation would not change them, but systems can be taken apart. Support can be removed. And I, after years of paying for this family's comfort, held the one lever they never expected me to pull. The real trigger was not their cruelty. It was my decision in that instant to stop funding it. I did not slam the door when I left my parents' house that night. I did not raise my voice or create a scene. I simply placed a hand on each of my boys' backs, guided them toward the car, and buckled them in. The silence between us felt thick, heavy enough to press against my ribs, yet I kept my breathing steady for their sake. Children read everything through the smallest cracks in a parent's face. When I pulled into our driveway, Darius, my husband, the man who never missed the shifts in my mood, opened the door before I even touched my keys. One glance at me, one glance at the boys, and he knew. He did not ask what happened the way most people would. He simply said gently, "Let us get them settled first." He helped Jalen find his sketchbook. He guided Theo toward the living room couch and started the nature documentary he loved. Only when they were occupied in their small worlds did Darius return to the kitchen, lean against the counter, and wait for me to speak. I did not know where to begin, so I began with the words that cut deepest. "My mother said the cousins eat first," I whispered, "and my kids, my boys, should wait for the crumbs." The muscle in Darius's jaw shifted, but he remained still. And my sibling laughed, I continued. My father supported them. They were not joking. They meant every word. I expected anger from him, outrage. Yet instead, Darius exhaled slowly as though he had always known this moment would come. "Sit," he said softly. I sat. "Selena," he began, "you have been supporting that entire household for years. Bills, repairs, payments, all of it. And you have never asked what any of that has cost you, not in money, but in dignity." I wanted to defend them the same way I had for years, but nothing emerged. Because the truth had already been sitting in the back of my throat since the moment Jalen looked at me with those sad, understanding eyes. "They do not see our sons as family," Darius said. "They see them as a complication, and they see you as the solution they can drain without ever feeling grateful." I offered no argument. I could not. That silence, the one that settled between us, was not defeat. It was clarity. He reached across the table and took my hand. So he asked quietly, "What do you want to do?" And just like that, the quiet plan began. I stood, walked to the drawer where we kept important papers, and pulled out my laptop and a clean legal pad. I had bought the pad months earlier, intending to use it for work notes. It had stayed blank until that night. I drew 4 columns: mortgage, auto, utilities, emergencies. Then I opened the banking app I had avoided examining too closely. I scrolled, page after page of transfers, payments tagged with messages like, "Just until we are caught up, family helps family." "We are short this month. It is only temporary." Under each category, I wrote numbers, dates, amounts. The pad filled faster than I expected. When Darius sat beside me, he did not interrupt. He simply slid a second pen across the table in case I needed it. By midnight, the pattern was undeniable. 8 years of support, structured, steady, almost scheduled. I whispered, "They have built their lives around my income, and they have built their arrogance on it too," Darius replied. I did not cry. Not because I was strong, but because something colder had settled into my chest. A kind of quiet steadiness I had never felt before. "I am finished," I said. Darius nodded. "Then let us make a list. First, call the mortgage company." I asked what my options were as a co-borrower. When the agent explained the process for removing myself, refinancing, qualification requirements, potential sale if they could not meet the numbers, I wrote every detail down. Second, call the auto lender. I instructed them to require my authorization for any credit adjustments or refinancing tied to my previous co-signature. Third, the utilities and payments I had set up during emergencies. I canceled every automatic transfer. Fourth, the savings transfer I had created years ago as a temporary cushion for my parents. Deleted permanently. Fifth, my accountant. I sent an email requesting a full review of personal support given to extended family over the past 8 years. Sixth, a family lawyer. Not for lawsuits, only for clarity, boundaries, and documentation. Every step was completed quietly. No grand announcement, no confrontation, just removal, just the ending of access. Around 2 in the morning, after the last account was adjusted, I closed my laptop and set my pen down. The house was silent. Even the refrigerator hum felt distant. Darius placed a mug of warm tea beside me, not as comfort as anchoring. "Do you feel better?" he asked. "No," I said honestly, "I feel awake." There was no satisfaction, not yet, just a realization. My silence that night, walking out without a word, refusing to plead or argue, had been the first act of power I had taken in years. And the blueprint I drafted on that legal pad, that was power solidified. Every unchecked box on my family's budget, every deposit they expected, every bill waiting for my name. All of it would strike them like a winter storm they never prepared for. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed protection. For my sons, for my home. For the part of me that remembered what crumbs used to taste like. The quiet plan was not emotional. It was not explosive. It was administrative, methodical, precise. A quiet rebalancing, long overdue. And by dawn, as I watched the first light stretch across our kitchen floor, I realized something. They had taught my children to expect less. Now they would learn what happens when I stop giving more. The first sign that my silence had reached them arrived exactly 48 hours later. I was packing Jalen's art supplies for school when my phone lit up with my father's name. Harold, the man who rarely called unless a payment was late or a new problem had appeared. "Selena," he said without greeting, "there seems to be some kind of issue with the mortgage. The transfer did not go through." I did not bother sitting down. "There is no issue," I replied. "I canceled it." The pause on the other end was sharp, the kind that cuts through a person's certainty. "You canceled it, without warning. I warned you," I said quietly. "You simply were not listening." He inhaled as though steadying himself. "This is your parents' home. We rely on, I know exactly what you rely on." I cut in. "That is why it stopped." Before he could respond, another call buzzed in. My sibling Vanessa, who had laughed while my son sat hungry in a corner, was already unraveling. I picked up. "Selena, what did you do?" she demanded. "My car payment was rejected. They said the Cosiner blocked adjustments. You know I cannot afford a hit on my credit right now." I leaned against the counter, watching the morning sun land on Theo's cereal bowl. "You will have to manage," I said, "the way you expect my sons to manage with whatever scraps they are given." That was a misunderstanding. "You said," I reminded her, "that my boys were born to live off what is left." "Those were your words." Silence, not guilt. just the sound of someone recalculating their losses. Before she could recover, my mother, Ellen, the architect of emotional leverage, called through FaceTime. I let it ring twice before answering. Her face appeared tight with panic. "Sweetheart," she began shakily. "Your father and I need to speak with you. The bills, things are piling up faster than we expected. We are in a difficult situation. Are you?" I said calmly. "You know we depend on that support. It is not fair to punish us like this." "Punish." The word hung there. "You punished my sons," I said, right in front of me. "That was different," she insisted. "We were being realistic about how the world works." "No," I said. "You were being realistic about how much you thought you could get away with because you assumed I would always pay." Her expression cracked, first confusion, then fear. "Selina, please, we could lose the house. And my children," I said softly, "could have lost their sense of worth if I remained silent." She flinched. I did not raise my voice. I did not threaten. I did not bargain. I simply laid out the truth in the same steady tone they had used while ranking grandchildren by normalcy. "The mortgage help will not return," I said. "The automatic transfers are gone. The cushion fund is gone. The co-signing access is locked. From now on, you live on your income like every other adult." "Selina," she whispered, "you cannot do this to us." "I am not doing anything to you," I replied. "I am stopping what you were doing to my children." Another silence, this one raw, unshielded. For the first time in years, I was not the one scrambling to repair the fallout. They were. And somewhere in the background of their panic, urgent shuffling, raised voices, footsteps pacing across hardwood, I heard the beginning of something they never thought they would feel. Desperation. The same desperation my sons felt sitting in a corner with empty plates. Only this time, the emptiness was not on my children's laps. It was in my parents' bank accounts, in their plans, in the security they believed I owed them. Their hierarchy collapsed exactly where it was built, on the foundation of my silence. And now that silence was gone. In the weeks that followed, the fallout settled into place with a quietness that felt almost unreal. There were no dramatic confrontations, no midnight arrivals at my door, no scenes worthy of a family intervention. Instead, everything unfolded the way truth usually does, slow, steady, and impossible to escape. My parents, Ellen and Harold, who once lived in a house too large for their actual needs, moved into a modest apartment on the other side of town. My sibling, Vanessa, who used to speak casually about comfort levels and normal-looking families, took on extra shifts to cover the payments she had once assumed I would handle. But in my own home, the air felt lighter. Jalen, my thoughtful 8-year-old, started taking the main seat at our dinner table, the one he used to avoid because that is where guests sit. Theo, always energetic, began talking more, asking questions, telling stories, laughing louder than he ever had at my parents' house. One evening, as I washed dishes after dinner, I watched them through the kitchen doorway. They were not waiting for permission. They were not checking adults' faces to see if they were allowed to take seconds. They simply existed, comfortable, visible, whole. Darius stood beside me drying plates. "You seem quieter," he said. "I'm not quiet," I answered. "I am settled." He nodded, understanding without needing explanation. The quiet was no longer emptiness. It was space. Space to think, space to breathe. Space for my children to know that their worth was not measured by someone else's hierarchy. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel vengeful. I felt aligned with myself, with my boys, with the boundaries I should have drawn years earlier. What they lost was comfort. What I gained was clarity. And for the first time in a long time, that balance finally felt right. In the end, it was not the money I took back that changed everything. It was the space I reclaimed. The day my parents taught my sons they were meant for crumbs was the day I stopped feeding a system that starved them. Some boundaries break families. Mine simply revealed the truth.